In 1736, a freshman member of the Pennsylvania legislature was doing everything right and getting nowhere. Benjamin Franklin had money, ambition, and a printing business that was starting to matter in Philadelphia. What he did not have was the support of one particular rival legislator, a wealthy and well-educated man who consistently opposed him and spoke against him in the chamber. Franklin tried the obvious moves first. He was polite, he was professional. He tried to demonstrate his own competence every chance he got, hoping the man would eventually come around on his own. None of it worked. The opposition stayed cold, and Franklin knew that a man who disliked him now would likely dislike him for years, since men in that kind of position rarely change their minds through ordinary persuasion. So Franklin did something that made no obvious sense. He did not try to win the man over with a favor. He asked the man for one. He had heard that this rival owned a rare and unusual book in his personal library, something scarce and hard to find anywhere else in the colony. Franklin sent him a short, respectful note asking if he might borrow it for a few days. The man sent the book over. Franklin read it, returned it about a week later with a brief note of sincere thanks. And that was, on the surface, the entire interaction. But something shifted after that. The next time the two men crossed paths in the legislature, the rival spoke to Franklin, something he had apparently never bothered to do before. He was, in Franklin's own words, civil in a way he had never been. From that point forward, the man became someone Franklin could count on, someone who supported him on more than one occasion for the rest of his life. Franklin later wrote it down as a piece of practical wisdom, something close to a proverb. He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged. Franklin did not have the vocabulary of modern psychology to explain why this worked. But 200 years later, researchers would give his accidental discovery a name and go looking for the mechanism underneath it. The idea sat mostly untested until the 1960s, when psychologists John Jecker and David Landy decided to run something close to a controlled version of Franklin's own experience. They set up a study where participants won money in a rigged contest, then were approached afterward in one of three ways. One group was asked by the experimenter himself to return the money as a personal favor, because he claimed the study had used his own private funds. A second group was asked to return it on behalf of the psychology department, a faceless institution rather than a person. A third group was not asked to return anything at all. Afterward, everyone rated how much they liked the experimenter, the people who had done him a personal favor, the ones who handed the money back specifically because he asked them to as an individual, rated him significantly more likable than either of the other two groups. Not the people who got a favor from him, not the people who did nothing. The people who gave something up for him at his direct request ended up liking him the most. Doing him a personal kindness had somehow made him more likable in their eyes, not less. The explanation that emerged from this, and the studies that followed, rests on something called cognitive dissonance, an idea developed a few years earlier by the psychologist Leon Festinger. The theory says that the mind cannot comfortably hold two contradictory beliefs at once, and when it finds itself doing exactly that, it quietly resolves the conflict, usually by changing the belief that is easier to change rather than the one that is harder to undo. Here is the contradiction the brain runs into after doing a favor for someone it does not particularly like. I just spent my time and effort helping this person. I do not generally spend my time and effort helping people I dislike. Those two facts cannot both be true without some kind of internal friction, and the mind resolves the friction by quietly revising the second belief. It concludes, without ever announcing the decision out loud, that it must actually like this person somewhat, since it just went out of its way for them. The behavior already happened. It cannot be undone. So the attitude bends to match the behavior instead of the other way around. This is also closely tied to a related idea called self-perception theory, proposed by Daryl Bem, which argues that people often figure out how they feel about something by watching their own actions, the same way an outside observer would. If you watched a stranger lend a rare book to someone, help a coworker move, or hand back a stack of cash they did not have to return, you would naturally assume that stranger liked the person they helped. Your own brain draws the identical conclusion when it watches you do the same thing, even when the original motive had nothing to do with affection. The favor was not proof of a feeling, but the mind treats it as proof anyway, and once it treats something as proof, that becomes the new working reality. What makes this different from ordinary flattery or manipulation is the direction the effort flows. When you do something for someone else, the goodwill sits with them, and there is no guaranteed reason it survives, since people forget favors done to them fairly quickly. When you ask someone to do something for you and they agree, the goodwill gets manufactured inside their own head, attached to their own self-image, and self-image is something people protect and maintain far more consistently than gratitude toward another person. A favor given creates an obligation. A favor received creates an identity, and people are considerably more loyal to their own identity than they are to a debt they owe someone else. This has quiet implications well outside legislature politics and psychology labs. Managers who ask a distant or difficult employee for a small piece of input, a professional opinion, a 5-minute review of something, often see the working relationship improve afterward, not because the manager did anything generous, but because the employee's brain has now filed that manager under the category of people worth helping. Salespeople who ask a hesitant prospect for a tiny piece of feedback rather than pushing another pitch sometimes close deals that direct persuasion could not touch, because the prospect's own mind starts building a rationale for continued investment. Even in personal relationships, a small, sincere request, borrowing an opinion, asking for a recommendation, asking someone to walk you through something they know well, tends to move a relationship forward faster than an unsolicited gift ever does. Because a gift asks nothing of the receiver's identity, while a request quietly recruits it. There is a boundary worth naming here, because the effect is not infinite and it is not automatic. Researchers who have revisited Franklin's story point out that it only works when the favor is small enough to be voluntary and specific enough to feel personal. A demand does not trigger this shift. Neither does a favor so large it feels like exploitation, since the mind is just as capable of resolving that particular contradiction by deciding it dislikes you for taking advantage of it. The mechanism depends on the other person genuinely choosing to help in a way that is easy, low cost, and clearly connected to you rather than some abstract entity. Ask for too much or ask in a way that removes their sense of choice, and the whole effect can run in reverse. What is easy to miss in Franklin's own account is that he was not performing kindness toward his rival at all. He was doing the opposite of what conventional wisdom about winning people over would suggest, and it worked precisely because it broke that convention. He gave the other man an opportunity to be generous and let that man's own mind quietly decide what his generosity must have meant. Franklin never tried to prove he was likable. He simply gave someone a small, easy reason to act as though he already was, and left the rest of the work to a mind that could not stand to hold two conflicting beliefs about itself at once.